In the headlines, U.S. President Barack Obama authorizes airstrikes in northern Iraq, warning that they will be launched if needed to defend Americans from advancing Islamic militants. South Korea's foreign minister holds talks with his Chinese counterpart at Asia's biggest security forum to discuss North Korea's nuclear program and other bilateral issues. He's also to meet with his Japanese counterpart on Saturday. And the Vatican says Pope Francis' visit to South Korea next week will send a message of reconciliation and peace for the Korean people. Hello and welcome to the show, live from Seoul. I'm Kang Tae-ri. U.S. President Barack Obama has ordered American warplanes back into Iraq. And for more on this story, Paul Yi is joining us from the News Center. Paul, Obama has finally pulled the trigger and granted Baghdad's request for air support. But at the same time, he did stress that the U.S. will take what he described as limited military action.
That's right. In a rather surprising announcement, President Obama said on Friday that he authorized the Pentagon to launch targeted airstrikes in Iraq to help thousands of trapped civilians with food drops and to stem the rapid advance of Islamic militants. Our Connie Lee has the details.
It's a green light to help those being persecuted in Iraq. In a televised address on Thursday, U.S. President Barack Obama ordered 2 separate operations in Iraq. In his own words, targeted airstrikes to protect U.S. personnel in Iraq and humanitarian efforts consisting of airdrops to help save thousands of Iraqi civilians who are trapped in the mountains and facing almost certain death. The Islamic militant group ISIS is gaining ground in northern Iraq, most recently seizing the largest Christian town of Karkush and forcing tens and thousands of Christians and ethnic minorities to flee. The United Nations says about 40,000 of them are trapped in northern mountains. They've been ordered by militants to convert to Islam or face execution.
Women and children are being killed. We cannot get help. I have 4 children and I don't know where they are. 2 have disappeared and I don't know what happened to the other 2.
Mass killings of religious and ethnic minorities are reportedly taking place, with militants even beheading children. This, according to one Christian leader in Iraq speaking to CNN. The United Nations Security Council, after an emergency meeting on the situation on Thursday, condemned the attacks and called on the international community to support Iraq. Just in the past 2 days alone, ISIS militants, with their black flags, have taken over 6 towns in the north of the country. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And in other news, Israel has resumed airstrikes in the Gaza Strip just hours after the 3-day ceasefire expired on this Friday. Paul, despite high hopes that talks between Israel and Hamas would lead to longer peace, yet another truce shatters in violence.
Right, and both sides are blaming each other for failing to extend this brief humanitarian ceasefire in the devastated territory. The Palestinian militant group Hamas had earlier rejected any extension of the truce, with senior officials saying Israel would not meet key demands, such as lifting the blockade on Gaza. Israeli Defense Forces said Palestinian militants had fired 33 rockets into southern Israel, even before the ceasefire was set to end, injuring a civilian and soldier. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the military to launch a forceful retaliation against what he called terror sites across the Gaza Strip.
We ceased all offensive operations against the terrorists in Gaza and we took up purely defensive positions. But Hamas this morning has opened fire on targets in Israel, on communities across the frontier. They have indiscriminately targeted men, women and children.
Hamas has not claimed responsibility for the rocket fire, but said it was from rival armed factions. Witnesses say they saw airstrikes and artillery shelling in the east and north of Gaza City. And according to emergency services, a 10-year-old boy was the first reported casualty in this bombardment, raising the Palestinian death toll to nearly 1,900.
And the World Health Organization has officially declared the Ebola outbreak in West Africa an international health emergency. Paul, this deadly disease has already ravaged health services across several African countries and killed hundreds so far. What does this declaration mean going forward?
Well, after a two-day emergency session in Geneva, the WHO Director Dr. Margaret Chan on Friday called for a joint international response to halt the epidemic. It also means the agency may enact global travel restrictions for the very first time in its history. This, as U.S. health authorities said, it's only a matter of time before the Ebola virus spreads beyond West Africa, worrying that more than 60 outbreak hotspots were now out of control. Our Shin Se-min has the latest.
I am declaring the current outbreak of Ebola virus disease a public health emergency of international concern.
It's official. In calling the deadly Ebola outbreak an extraordinary event and an emergency, the World Health Organization is saying it's a public health risk to other countries. In a statement released after a two-day meeting of its emergency committee, the WHO said a coordinated worldwide response is needed to stop and reverse the worldwide spread of the disease. The UN Health Agency also said that although concerns are growing, there should be no general bans placed on international travel. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already elevated their response on the spread of Ebola to its highest level this week and has recommended against traveling to West Africa. Amid growing international pressure to consider the use of experimental drugs in combating the virus, the U.S. government is forming a special Ebola working body that will explore its options. The WHO says more than 1,700 people have been infected in the current Ebola outbreak that has killed at least 932 people. The UN organization declared similar emergencies for the swine flu pandemic in 2009 and for polio earlier this year. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And finally, turning back to the Middle East, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Kabul in a bid to resolve the prolonged standoff in the country's national election. How is he approaching this political crisis?
Well, Kerry is planning to hold talks with rival presidential candidates as well as current leader Hamid Karzai to drive home a deal to prevent Afghanistan's first democratic transfer of power from collapsing. After Kerry's first visit in July, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah agreed to resolve the election dispute amid allegations of voter fraud. However, both candidates remain far apart on forming a united government. A massive audit of all 8 million ballots is underway, but neither candidate has openly endorsed the process, raising fears of violent conflict along ethnic lines when the results are announced. While Karzai has said the next president will be inaugurated on August 25th, most officials say the deadline is optimistic and it could take several more weeks for a winner to emerge. Charity?
All right, certainly keeping our eyes on this story. Thank you very much, Paul, for that update, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Kerry for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. This weekend's ASEAN Forum in Myanmar will host the region's top diplomats for talks on matters of mutual concern. But the sidelines will see the most action. Korea's foreign minister is set to hold a series of talks with his counterparts over the coming days. And he started off this Friday by meeting with the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
Top diplomats from Korea and China met this afternoon on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum in Myanmar to discuss the North Korean nuclear issue. Details of their meeting have yet to come out, but Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se was widely expected to call on his counterpart Wang Yi to continue persuading the North to soften its stance on the nuclear issue. The possibility of resuming six-party talks was also expected to come up. Yoon has joined diplomats from ASEAN member states and other major nations in Naypyidaw for a series of meetings that will culminate in the ASEAN Regional Forum on Sunday. It's widely expected he'll use the arena to also hold meetings with India and Canada and trilateral talks with Japan and the U.S. focusing on the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Particular attention is on Minister Yoon's bilateral talks with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida scheduled for Saturday. The meeting, the first in 11 months, is expected to deal with a flurry of diplomatic issues as ties between the two countries have hit a low point in recent months over historical and territorial differences. Could a South and North meeting also be in the works? North Korea's new Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young will be in attendance this weekend after a series of visits to other nations in the region, including Vietnam and Singapore. It's expected that he will also hold talks with China, as well as Mongolia and Myanmar during the forum. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Korea's finance minister has called on the parliament to quickly pass a stack of bills that are needed to help boost the Korean economy. He says it needs to be done as soon as possible as the structural problems plaguing Korea's economy are deeply rooted. Kwon So-ah has this report.
At least 30 economic bills need to be passed as soon as possible to ensure they don't miss the golden time of a chance to revitalize the nation's economy. This is what Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said at an emergency meeting with economy-related ministers on Friday, once again putting pressure on lawmakers who have more than 7,000 bills awaiting parliamentary approval. Choi asked for the National Assembly's cooperation, stressing that this is the last chance to put the focus on raising household income, which should in turn boost domestic demand and the overall economy. He warned there wasn't much time, emphasizing the country's GDP increased a mere 0.6% in the second quarter of the year from the previous quarter. The minister said out of the 30 most urgent bills, 18 concern the investment sector, 6 the normalization of the housing market, 3 are related to the public welfare, and another 3 on the protection of financial and private data. To fulfill that goal, Choi asked that all ministers take the issue directly into their own hands to gain the understanding and cooperation of the people and the assembly, and told them he will be closely monitoring their progress. The government's new tax revision on conglomerates and others will be subject to parliamentary revision at a plenary session next week. Since before his inauguration as finance minister in July, Choi's priority has been on revitalizing the economy by easing financial regulations, which runs in line with President Park's deregulation drive. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Korea's largest automaker has been slapped with a $17.3 million fine in the U.S. for delayed reporting of a brake defect. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says Hyundai Motor failed to notify them in a timely manner that certain components on Hyundai Genesis sedans produced between 2009 and 12 were at risk of corrosion, which could reduce braking effectiveness and increase the risk of a crash. The Korean automaker recalled more than 43,000 vehicles in October in 2013, that is, after the U.S. agency uncovered this issue. Hyundai Motor says most of the affected vehicles have since been repaired. Chinese yuan-denominated deposits at banks in Korea jumped to a record high last month. Deposits reached $16.2 billion in July, up $4.2 billion from the month before. The Bank of Korea attributed this growth to more local institutions putting their money in the hands of Chinese lenders who have recently raised their interest rates. But deposits in the U.S. dollar, the euro, and the Japanese yen all dropped from the month before. Foreign investors have continued their buying spree in the Korean equities market for a fourth straight month in July. Korea's Financial Supervisory Service says foreign investors scooped up a net 3.6 trillion won, which is roughly about $3.5 billion worth of Korean stocks last month. The agency says the value of their shareholdings at about $443 billion at the end of July, took up more than 33% of the total market capitalization. Investors from the U.S. were the biggest buyers, followed by those from Japan and Saudi Arabia. South Korea is getting ready to welcome Pope Francis, who will be in town next week. He will be greeted by President Park Geun-hye at the airport and is expected to deliver a message of inter-Korean reconciliation. Our Kim Young-gil reports on the Pope's itinerary released by the Vatican on Thursday.
Pope Francis will be the first pontiff in nearly 2 decades to visit the Far East when he visits South Korea next week. The Vatican said Thursday that during his 5-day visit, Pope Francis will attend the closing Mass at the Youth Day gathering and the Reconciliation Mass at Myeongdong Cathedral in Seoul.
Going to Korea and praying for reconciliation and peace for the Korean people has a great significant meaning.
He will also celebrate the Asian World Youth Day with young people across the continent and beatify the large group of martyrs who first brought the Catholic faith to Korea. He will find in Korea a Catholic church that exemplifies much of what he hopes for the church around the world to be, including a highly active laity. The Vatican also confirmed that North Korea has declined to send Catholic believers to a papal mass in Seoul, but said the invitation from the South Korean church was still open. Pope Francis will meet relatives of the victims of April's Healthrelated ferry sinking, as well as surviving Korean comfort women who were forced into sex slavery for Japanese troops during World War II. For the first time on a foreign trip, Pope Francis will speak in public on 4 occasions in English among his 11 speeches. The pontiff's plane is due to fly over Chinese airspace, and Vatican protocol calls for the Pope to send greetings to the leaders of all the countries he flies over. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
The former chairman of the ruling Saenuri Party is now the Korea's new education minister. The National Assembly's Education Committee signed off on Hwang Woo-ye on Friday following his confirmation hearing the day before. The 5-term lawmaker was tapped for the post after President Park Geun-hye's first choice Kim Myung-soo withdrew about a month ago over allegations of plagiarism. The Assembly has one more confirmation hearing to get to now, that being for Culture Minister nominee Kim Jong-duk. In the wake of the April ferry disaster here in Korea, President Park vowed to root out corruption, starting with collusive ties between the public and private sectors. And for the very first time since, an arrest warrant has been sought against a member of the National Assembly over suspicions that he took tens of thousands of dollars from a company in exchange for some benefits. Connie Kim fills us in.
State prosecutors are seeking an arrest warrant for a National Assembly member over bribery charges. Ruling Saenuri Party representative Cho Hyun-yong is suspected of taking more than $150,000 from local train part supplier Sampyo ENC in return for awarding the company lucrative contracts. The prosecution accuses Cho of taking money from the Korea Rail Network before and after he was elected as a lawmaker in 2012. It represents the first such case since President Park pledged to root out corruption among public and elected officials in wake of April's Healthrelated ferry disaster. Collusive ties between regulators and the operator of the ferry have been blamed for its sinking. It's common in Korea for retired bureaucrats to be hired by companies and public institutions that expect them to pressure their former colleagues or subordinates to ignore corrupt or irregular practices at the organizations. As of now, 1 sitting representative from the ruling party and 3 from the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy are under suspicion of receiving bribes. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Korea, Japan, and China have rather complicated relationships with one another, affected by centuries of historical conflicts and disputes. But student representatives from these three countries are trying to look beyond their differences. Park Ji-won tells us more.
These teenagers from three different countries, Korea, China, and Japan, are laughing as they play games together. They may not understand one another because of the language barrier, but that isn't stopping them from enjoying themselves.
History shows us numerous conflicts between our countries, but actually meeting these people gave me fresh ideas about friendship.
Neither English nor Japanese work here, but it's great that we have so much fun beyond the language barrier.
The events are fun and the people here are very kind. I hope this can be an opportunity to promote mutual friendship and erase prejudice we might have against one another.
This program is part of an annual education tourism forum organized by the governments of the three countries. It was launched in 2006 to nurture a global mindset in the hearts of the young.
Over the past few decades, Germany and France have organized exchanges of about 7 million students. They've turned once hostile memories of war into a new cooperative relationship. I believe Korea, Japan, and China can make a new road into the peaceful future through the active engagement of student exchanges.
Organizers hope the opportunity provides participating students a chance to develop a global perspective and builds mutual understanding. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News, Gwangju.
Now on to some health-related news. Varicose veins can cause a lot of pain and grief, especially in the summer when people bare their legs in cool summer clothing. Our Sun Jang-in tells us how this condition can be prevented by making small fashion changes.
Summer is the season for shorts and short skirts, but there are some who won't even consider that as an option for fear of exposing their legs due to lumpy dark blue veins visible beneath the surface. Varicose veins are developed when valves and veins are weakened or damaged. That disrupts blood from flowing up toward the heart. The blood then collects in the veins, causing them to become swollen and twisted. The condition is often hereditary, but other factors like aging, pregnancy, or standing up for long periods of time can also contribute to the problem. Women whose hormones tend to relax the walls of veins are more likely to be affected than men, especially women in their 50s. But recently, more younger women are visiting the doctor complaining of the issue. According to data, the number of female patients in their 20s here in Korea surged 5% on average every year from 2007 to 2012. Doctors say it is important to prevent varicose veins in the early stages by wearing elastic compression stockings to improve blood flow. They also advise people not to cross their legs when sitting for a long period of time.
In some cases, simple laser treatment or sclerotherapy can effectively treat varicose veins. It leaves no scars so that people can regain confidence.
Standing in place and rising up on the balls of the feet can help strengthen the calf muscles to better push blood to the heart. Sun Jang-in, ARIRANG News.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. We had a hot day here in Seoul, but there is nice cool breeze in the air relieving us from this heat. And by the looks of it, we have partly cloudy skies nationwide. Now, currently, areas along the eastern coastlines are receiving light showers due to the influence of Typhoon Halong, and starting tomorrow, up to 200 millimeters of heavy rain is expected for the southern coastal regions, and also strong wind advisory is in effect in the coastlines. Now, other areas down south may get up to 10 to 40 millimeters, while Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do province can expect between 30 to 80 millimeters of precipitation. So for those of you on the roads, please be extra careful. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Actually, for the areas that will go unaffected by the typhoon, such as here in the central region, can expect a hot sunny day tomorrow, so I hope you plan your weekend's outings accordingly. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Saturday morning at 23 before reaching up to 31 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will both get up to 27 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops to 27 as well, while Tokyo hits 22, while Mount Kumgang tops to 26. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching, and I will see you back here at 10 p.m. Korea time for Primetime News.